Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Thursday, March 14th, and it's also a pleasure to be joined here in the studio by two distinguished journalists from the area. Greg Sukiennik is the Vermont managing editor for the Bennington Banner, Manchester Journal, and Brattleboro Reformer, and Darren Marcy is the managing editor of the Journal. Gentlemen, welcome to GNAT.
Thank you.
Great to be back.
Welcome back to GNAT, I should say. So, a lot to get to today. Town meeting week finally ended last week. A lot of things going on as usual. I thought just to kind of get us started today, just sort of ask you, what were your reflections or overall feelings about town meeting week, that just passed? Different than usual or about the same?
Well, without a lot to compare it to, I thought town meeting, voters were in a pretty giving mood from everything that I saw. Very few folks voting nay against any of the spending measures. Wasn't a lot of debate over budgets. Schools even were funded without too much opposition. It was amazing that people were actually very happy, it seems, with the budgets they were presented, and they supported them.
I'd have to concur. It seemed like actually some of the contested seats in a few of the towns in the Australian ballot election that followed on Tuesday were had a little more heat to them than town meeting itself. And also the school board meeting where we wound up with brand new member of the Taconic and Green School Board, Rachel Strecker. Through her involvement in the pre-K situation that they're dealing with.
Well, let's start with that, because that struck me as one of the more interesting and, dare I say, controversial moments of the week or so of town meeting. If we wanted to start from, I guess it was the 26th of February when the Taconic and Green had its annual meeting there at the MEMS gym. And clearly the pre-kindergarten situation was on the minds of some of the folks there. Where do you see this all going? I mean, there is another meeting on Monday night coming up that I guess we'll delve into this a little bit further.
Yes, the Taconic and Green are holding a special meeting on March 18th, Monday, specifically to talk about the pre-K issue. They're on the 13th and 14th of March are holding pre-registration, so every parent in the area who would like to have their kids in have 3 and 4 year olds that would like to be in a pre-K situation should have at that point expressed those desires, filled out. They were going to be presented with a comprehensive survey. Basically, the T&G board is wanting to know what people want, and we've heard a lot of noise from the folks who don't like what they were going to do, and just real quickly to recap that basically MEMS has had a 5-day-a-week program. Other schools in the newly formed T&G district have had various 2 days, 0 days, those kinds of things. They're trying to add a little bit of parity to this. They're trying to give everybody some access to pre-K. And in order to do that, they were going to pare back the MEMS offerings to either 2 days or 4 days, and it gets real complicated even from there. But the first thing they needed to do is find out what the demand was. If they are overrun with parents wanting 5-day access to pre-K education, they said that they'd look into how they could possibly do it. There's no guarantees. There's laws that prevent them from adding capacity. I can't remember the exact law right now, but basically the state legislature took away their ability to add capacity to the pre-K to somewhat protect local daycare operators. They didn't want the schools to steal all the kids out of daycare businesses.
Yeah, I mean, the Agency of Education and the Agency of Human Services up in Montpelier both have a say in, I guess, in pre-K operations and how they're structured and how the public program sort of jives with what may be available privately.
It seems like a classic case of unintended consequences, where here's an agency that was trying to do the right thing to protect private daycare providers, but at the same time wound up turning upside down a system that was working pretty well for parents here in the North Shire. And I know that Kelly, my apologies in the pronunciation of your last name, Kelly, Pajal or Payal, I'm not quite sure which. With his name like Sukiennik, I should know better than that. Would talk to Londonderry voters and Winhall voters as well about urging folks who were interested in the programs and who had concerns to speak up, so that the Taconic and Green Board could hear their concerns and then be able to find a way to move forward.
Of course, it's become, I guess, a bigger issue than maybe it might have been 5 or 10 years ago, because now you have so many families where both parents are working, and having some kind of way for the child to be, looked after during the day, of course, is really important. But I guess the question seems to be a lot, the financial side of it. I mean, if you're in a public program, it's a subsidized program. If you're paying a private provider, that could be pretty expensive. And I'm not saying that they're, kind of in a get-rich-quick scheme or anything, because I'm sure their costs are high, and the salaries for some of the teachers aren't exactly, anything anyone's going to fantasize about retiring on anytime in the near future. But it does create a bit of a financial pressure for the parents.
Daycare is unaffordable at the low end of the income range. There's a lot of parents who choose to stay home rather than pay their entire paycheck to the daycare system. And you're right, it's not that anyone's getting rich off of this, it's just it costs money to take care of kids. A lot of those state mandates on how many providers you have to have per child and those kinds of things, it drives up the cost. And one of the problems that we're finding is, as they've delved into this issue, is the state knows it's a problem. It's a problem throughout the state. But apparently they're focusing more, from Ms. Payala's statement at Winhall at least, they're focusing a lot more on the daycare side of this rather than the pre-K. And that's one of the problems, is there really is no division, legally or anything else. But, most people think of a 3-year-old as a daycare situation and a 4-year-old as a pre-K, but there really is no difference when you're a parent trying to work and you need to find a place for your kids to be. And yeah, that's one of the problems that they've faced with reducing the hours at MEMS. They're saying, okay, even if we get into the 4-day program, who's going to take our child for the 5th day? And it really creates a dilemma for parents.
And the school systems and parents and providers, private providers, all need to have some idea of what's going to happen sooner than later in order to be able to plan for the next year ahead. So we might be seeing a lot of back and forth on this really quickly over the next month or so.
One of the things I was kind of interested to find out is whether or not this is a situation that we're seeing elsewhere around the state. In other school districts that have formed regional districts like the Sukiennik and Green, I'm unaware of any other regional district that is experiencing this particular situation. Yeah. Although you would think that, well, if this is the case here, then in other communities they must be facing the same problem.
It makes sense. I haven't heard, but I'm pretty focused right here in this area. And one of the problems that you mentioned is, well, it's not a problem, it's just the way it is with the Act 46 and the merger. Jackie Wilson, the superintendent of the BRSU, is really trying to find ways to offer parity. There's kids in one school that don't have any daycare or pre-K at all. Sorry, not daycare, pre-K. They'll get on me if I call it daycare. But it's they've had 0 offerings. Rob Giotti in Dorset, he stood up at the town meeting, or the T&G meeting, and he said, "Look, I'm glad you guys are going to offer us something, because as a parent in Dorset, we've had nothing." Yeah. So getting something for those parents has meant something.
I think also the T&G, because of its size, you're trying to provide equity for 9 towns. It was very easy for example, Arlington School Board, there's pre-K that's provided there. That's 1 town. There's no questions about it. Everyone's here who needs to be here, and we can figure this out. When you're trying to figure out equity for 9 towns that range, dramatically in size, population, demographics, not as easy. And then you have transportation to figure out as well.
Right.
Certainly if you're only going to have this program in Manchester, that's a little more difficult for parents in Sunderland.
Yeah.
Depending, or wherever else they might live, depending on what's available and what they need.
You've got the mountain towns, and that
Yes.
adds to it. I mean, who wants to be bringing their kid down the mountain in winter just to go to pre-K, especially if it's only 2 days?
Yeah, that's definitely a to-be continued subject, and
Indeed.
it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that meeting on Monday. So the other thing that struck me as kind of interesting, at least at the Manchester meeting, was the plastic bag question. I know the group had come before the select board back, I think it was last fall, and had sought to get the Manchester Select Board to weigh in on a ban on plastic bags or single-use plastic bags for grocery shopping and whatnot. At that time, it was then, so they sort of deflected it up to the State House, the idea being that a statewide solution would be preferable to the town-by-town one, although Brattleboro, I guess, put through a ban on the single-use plastic bags. And
In Wilmington.
Wilmington is, did they do that, or are they considering it?
I believe they've moved forward, I believe.
Okay, and Middlebury and
Don't hold me to
Burlington,
that
I think are two other towns that are at least looking into that. And I guess there's a bill before the legislature that would do the statewide ban. I guess what's the next step here? Are we just, is the Manchester Select Board going to take this up maybe at their next meeting or after they've reorganized? Or any sense that they would try to do something that would be Manchester exclusive? Or we're going to say pretty much the same thing they said last fall, which was, let's do this on a statewide level?
Nobody has told me what they're planning to do, but I would have to guess that they're looking at Montpelier and hoping that they do something so they don't ever have to mess with it down here.
We were expecting that there might be testimony from students who've been one of the large drivers of this at the most recent select board meeting, which would have been 2 days ago from when this was filmed. That they didn't appear on the agenda, but or in person. But at the same time, I believe there were students from Manchester and from MEMS and from Burn Academy who were in Montpelier.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're going to be looking at this coming week for the Journal, and so maybe we'll we see exactly what the legislature has in mind, and if it's I think a lot has to do in terms of local support. Whether the state's going to act or not. If it's clear the state's going to act, then Manchester can sit back and say, okay, we'll do everything the way we had in mind. And if the state gets bogged down, if the legislature gets bogged down in this, then maybe that brings more pressure. So I think it's a wait and see situation.
It'll be interesting to see if the legislature does go forward with it. I think there's a lot of sentiment that this would be a good idea and something that would should be possible to do. I was interested to see that the Grocers Association came out kind of saying, like, hey, we can live with it if it's a statewide thing. If we have to, if we can send our plastic bags to Rutland, but we can't send them to the next town up the road, then that starts to become a little bit problematic.
I could see that problem, and that's one of the things that I've heard several times. Don't put us at a competitive disadvantage. If the next town over can offer free plastic bags and we can't, it might make a difference for somebody. Yeah. I got to say real fast, I'm real not proud of these kids because I support what they're doing or anything. I'm completely neutral on what they're doing, but I'm proud to see these kids getting involved.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, the BBA kids, the MIMS kids, they're taking an active role in an issue that they care about, and I mean, they've taken it to Montpelier, and they sat in and testified, and it's great to see the local kids doing that.
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time shaking, wringing our hands about the fact that there's all this apathy going on out there, so when you do see some kind of activism, it's, whether or not you agree with it or not, it's good to see the effort going in there.
And I do think the board recognizes that, for what's worth.
So meanwhile, speaking of Arlington, they put through by a whopping margin that proposal to create a town administrator position. The only thing that surprised me about that was the size of that defeat. I think it was like 80% in favor. They still haven't figured out whether it's a part-time or full-time job though yet. I guess the wording of it was vague enough so that it could be pretty much anything they decide they want to do, but clearly my sense was that the select board would be happy with a part-time person starting next January. The Arlington Area Renewal Project folks who kind of were really driving this question all seem to want a full-time person.
Well, it seems to me that the Arlington Renewal Project seems to be, has made some inroads in terms of building support, because if to the extent that there is broad-based support for eventually making it a full-time position. That said, certainly a full-time position entails benefits and higher cost to a town that's still paying for its own school system. So I think it'd be interesting to see how much interest there might be in a part-time position, and if it plays out the way my hunch is, it'll eventually wind up being full-time, simply because the scope of the job and the sort of talent you need to fill that role is, you could find someone who's retired in the area who's willing to do that on a part-time basis. And I think that's probably, for Arlington's leaders, that's probably hey, let's see if we've got someone who can fill the role that way. And if not, then there's always the full-time option. That might be their thinking.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because I find myself thinking that this could be a job that could demand a full-time person if they really want to go into the grant writing business full-time and address some of the other issues that the Renewal Project folks have been trying to bring to their attention.
If you look at the number of municipal grants that larger towns, such as Manchester and Bennington, write, that does take. That's not something you just sort of do on the side for fun. That's not like your blog. It's kind of a full-time pursuit, and has to be done by a certain way, by certain deadlines, and meeting certain conditions. So, what you were saying?
What also is so interesting about it seems like this is also part of a larger narrative around which a lot of these town offices, struggle to be filled. We're seeing more and more in more communities. It seems like either positions that are going unfilled, and of course the prime example of that might be the Sunderland situation, where 3 vacancies on the select board emerged by town meeting. Nobody stepped forward to declare themselves a candidate. They were able to fill 2 of them through write-in votes, but the third one is still vacant at this time. And I guess it just goes to maybe illustrate that there's the job of being a select board member or a town official is more complicated than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, back in the good old days, whenever they were.
Yeah, it certainly has gotten more complicated. You look at the Act 250 and all the various regulations and state laws that have come down to, you now have to almost be a town manager yourself just to sit on the select board. It takes dedication to learn this stuff. And your point about the open seats, every town has board positions, committee positions that are pretty important positions that they're having trouble filling. It seems like there's very, very few towns have every position filled and aren't looking for someone.
Right.
But then again, Sunderland did get 2 select board members up from the floor at its town meeting, and an assessor and a moderator and a lister, I believe. Although some of those are the same people, Sunderland being the size of Sunderland. Manchester had 3 write-in candidates for select board.
Right.
The Taconic and Green district had a write-in candidate for an at-large position. I know there had been concern about whether parent involvement and community involvement would be lessened by Act 46, and this seems to indicate that, given the right issue and the right interests, that the parents are still very involved and interested enough to actually get involved in politics to move forward with that. So I think there are signs that, yes, it's a more complicated job, and there's less time to go around for everybody. I think that's a major factor.
Right.
But we have seen some folks stepping forward and giving their time to their communities.
Yeah, well, so that's good, but yeah, that time factor clearly is a big issue. Before we leave town meeting stuff to talk about a few other things, anything you guys noticed over the other side of the mountain there in Londonderry or Wynn Hall? I guess Wynn Hall had a much calmer town meeting this year than they did last year, when the tax rate driven by the school enrollment. I'm sure had a lot of people gasping.
Yeah.
But this year, their enrollment numbers eased off. The tax rate declined 40 cents. That's going to be nice, I think.
Indeed.
But I don't know. Greg, you were over at the Londonderry meeting. Anything pop up there that struck you as intriguing?
Londonderry's meeting went, it was about an hour and a half in. They'd sailed through the budget, and then it wound up taking 4 hours. Because as often happens at town meeting, it gets down to sort of the smaller money items at the back end of the agenda. And I don't know if because people are tired or hungry or yes, but suddenly those items are the ones that get picked apart a little bit more.
It's always fascinated me how people will vote through a multi-million-dollar budget, and then we'll talk for half an hour about $2,000 appropriation.
Sure.
Or something like
I think
that.
twice now Manchester has sailed through its budget. In two consecutive years, Manchester has sailed through its budget and then taken a good half an hour to an hour to discuss $50,000 for the MBA, for the Manchester Business Association. So that's I think that's just sort of something that's baked into the process.
Right.
Londonderry is interesting because I haven't attended a Londonderry meeting before, so I don't have anything to compare this year's to. But they do everything. They do all their business from the floor, elections, officers, the whole 9 yards. So, but it was even though there was some back and forth with some issues, things stayed agreeable, and it didn't get contentious or personal. Which, when you start at 9:30 and you're waiting on lunch, is that's a fairly remarkable accomplishment. So, what was interesting at Londonderry was there was a group of students from Floodbrook Union School who were watching the proceedings from the balcony in that beautiful old town hall of theirs in South Londonderry for a unit on it's kind of a sense of place unit, is knowing where you live and how things work. And they were taking in government right there from the balcony. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is neat.
As I understand it, those Floodbrook kids, whichever town they come from, they attend their town meeting in that town. And I can't remember what grade, 10th graders, 8th graders? I don't remember.
6th, 7th, and 8th.
6th, okay, so maybe the middle school.
Yes.
So that's great. Love to see kids involved there, and even if they're bored, they're getting educated, and
Absolutely.
I would imagine they were interested.
Well, we got a few minutes left, and there's a couple of things I'd love to chat about before we go. And the number one thing, of course, is the whole situation surrounding Southern Vermont College. It's been a big statewide story, coming relatively close on the heels of Green Mountain College and Poultney closing. Now, the college down there in Bennington also closing its doors at the end of the school year, really pointing out the fact that these small colleges are under a lot of financial stress, and the enrollment situation is not getting better.
That's true. When you have schools that are dependent upon enrollment revenue for their lifeblood, and if in the case of Green Mountain and SVC having a fairly significant debt, as well as a percentage of their total value of their assets, that's tough for any business. But it does seem that there's a run on small colleges, small private colleges facing closure, and I think it does sort of offer some bold relief on the importance for Vermont paying some more attention to the way that it's funding its public state colleges. And that's an issue in Montpelier where they're discussing whether to give them an additional $3 million or the additional $5 million a year that the state college presidents are asking for. So, and there's also questions about whether the state could possibly step in and do something at the SVC or Green Mountain campuses.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been hearing over and over is this state is. We're trying to attract young families. We're trying to keep young people from leaving the state, or at least get them to come home after. Yet there seems to be this fear of funding colleges and things that would keep those kids here. You go to school in a community, you're much more likely to stay than if you leave, experience something else, than you would be to come back. The difference between private and public is, obviously that's there, but you're looking at a 300 or 500 population student body, and the funds, they're just not there to keep the kids there and keep the campuses open. Plus,
with SVC, we're looking at a couple of significant community impacts. We're looking at the loss of a nursing program that SVMC was counting on to help fill the roles of nurses. There's been a shortage in nursing for as long as I can remember.
Sure.
And also, when you consider the economic impact of the salaries and benefits paid to SVC employees, and also the economic impact of students, buying groceries, furniture, pizza, beverages, that economic impact is going to hit Greater Bennington, and so that's, it's going to be some interesting days ahead to see how we all react and respond to that.
It's just once again, I mean, it just seems like the money question hangs over everything. I'm sure that everyone in the state legislature and the governor's office would love to kind of be able to wave a wand and say, here's the $3 million or $5 million or whatever it is you need to keep going, because despite the fact that some of the alumni are trying to do some GoFundMe campaigns and raise some money, I mean, the amounts of money you're talking about are really large. It's not $100,000 or $200,000.
No, we're talking about millions
of dollars. And then is it sustainable down the road? I mean, okay, so let's say we come up with somebody who's willing to give you $5 million to keep the place open.
Right, and the likelihood that these are not the last small private colleges in Vermont that are going to close in the near term in the next year or two. Yeah, there's real cause for concern here.
Very troubling situation. I know, Darren, you wanted very much to talk about a certain election in Fairhaven, of all places.
Yeah, well, there's very important election. Fairhaven, for the first time ever, has elected a mayor. This
Just
mayor
doesn't have two
No
legs.
kidding.
Mayor, actually, the mayor has come from Manchester, was born and raised at Hildene. This mayor has presidential pedigree. It's
Maybe presidential ambitions.
yeah, I mean, it's it's a stunning victory for a local kid. Done good.
Local kid makes
Greg's
good.
headline. It was a goat.
For those that missed this one, a goat from Hildene got elected mayor of Fairhaven.
And it wasn't the greatest of all time, like
Okay.
Tom Brady is, but
Not that kind of goat.
the literal a goat born and raised at Hildene, named Hammy Sue when she was born,
Okay.
was then renamed Lincoln in honor of Hildene.
Right.
And
That's
won
large ears.
yeah, and she has some very distinctive ears sticking out instead of drooping down. And kids over there are trying to raise some money for playground equipment. And they thought this would be an interesting way. Charge the kid $5 to enter their pet into a mayoral contest. And Lincoln outpolled a Samoyed, a dog, by 2 votes. To win the mayorship. She was sworn into office into her honor as of
There
Tuesday.
wasn't a recount?
I did not hear a request for a recount, although it probably should have been.
Well, it's good to see that we're keeping Vermont weird, or whatever it is.
That is an unbelievable headline.
I think so. Well,
I think there's anywhere to go for after that. Sorry.
stay tuned, folks. A lot more to come. Clearly, we have many things coming out of town meeting that will kind of, continue to keep us interested in going off to school board meetings and select board meetings and whatever else it is we need to do from time to time. But in the meantime, we'll thank you for being with us today. I want to thank Greg Sukiennik and Darren Marcy for being our panelists today, and for having you with us today. And we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.